So I just want to pick up one that you reminded me of. That goes back to successes. I think that one of the great successes was the performance model of the digital object, which separates, which says you have the software and you have the data, and it's a performance that happens. This comes out of the work of the Australians. And why is this important? Because some places, the interrelationship between the data, such as in early games, for example, the interrelationship between the data and the software that make a performance is very tightly coupled. Whereas the interrelationship between a Word document and Word is nowhere nearly as tightly coupled, or a PDF and a PDF reader. So it's a performance, and once you start thinking about it as a performance, you can then start to think about theories of representation and whether or not that performance is as good as the initial performance. So you can start to talk about philosophers like Nelson Goodman and the theories of aesthetics, and you can start to bring that to start to create a theory around digital preservation. So I really find that performance model to be extremely important. And the other thing that it reminds me of is a very early paper from the early 90s by Doran Swade called Software as a Cultural Artifact. Doran Swade was at the Science Museum in London, and he'd spent a lot of time working on Babbage's difference engine and displaying it, making models, working models of it and so forth. But he was also the person who was responsible for getting teams of people interested in the Pegasus computer. The Pegasus was an early mainframe computer built in the Ferranti Pegasus was built in the late 50s, early 60s. This particular one that they have at the Science Museum was in London first, then I think it was in Scandinavia, and it came back, and it was used in a range of different companies over a number of years. And he got the system working again. And that team of people who worked with him, they were people who'd actually worked with that Pegasus original. They also made a simulation model of it, so you could see how you could build a simulation, and how the simulation was not the same experience as actually watching them run Pegasus. If you saw them turn it on, some tube blew, they had to go and figure out which cabinet it was, open the cabinet, take the tube down, plug in a new tube pack. Well, that was interesting. Very early on in the 1950s, they were doing modularity in development. They had tube packs because it made it easier to find. But he was in all this work and looking at software made him actually curious about software as a cultural artifact. That software is a representation of our current work practices, our understanding of the technology that's available to us, our understanding about the ways we can make it useful to us, and in the future what we're going to be looking back at is trying to understand our culture through the software that was used at any given time. Now, the interesting problem about that is, to do that, you need to be able to replicate the environments in which it's run so you can actually see it running. And the video of it is just not good enough. So, sorry.
So I'm not sure. Yes, do they go on? I'm just leading on from the software. It's a question I've been wanting to ask for a few minutes, but it does lead on from what Seamus has said there. There's just a few things you've said this afternoon relating to my area, computing science. Early on, Seamus, you said when you were talking about the communities that came together, you said some people who knew about technology. And later on, you were talking about the difficulty in getting funding for digital curation and preservation, unless you were gaining something else, like with crowdsourcing or interface or something. And then you mentioned a few computing scientists later on, and you spoke a bit about data mining. And I suppose my question comes with looking in the future, with the amount of data that is being preserved. Do you think that one of the future directions is in the data mining, the data exploration, and the data analysis, even though you said that you didn't think that that was your area, that the area of digital curation and preservation is separate from the area of analysis? Or do you think that eventually these fields of the data mining will naturally come together because they do seem to fit together?
I mean, I think, Jim can follow up. I absolutely agree insofar as, in fact, it's here already, because there are good examples of digital preservation facilities which in a variety of different ways enable data mining. The best example, again, momentarily comes to mind, is the UK Web Archive, where they've finally realised that a great use of web archives isn't trying to look at every web page one at a time. Yeah? Actually, a visualisation of different things you can do is going to be much, much more useful. There's a risk, and we need to address this, there's a risk that if all we're thinking about is dissemination according to sort of dissemination information packages for human readers, that will design systems which don't enable that sort of high performance computing or data analysis to take place. So I think there's genuine research to be done around dissemination information packages which are not for people or not for individuals, or accessed through some sort of third, some sort of mediating kind of computing environment which will allow that data analysis to take place. And even better if it's taking place on 2 or 3 different data sets simultaneously, because that's where the value will come from. That's where the, for example, the X-ray medical records would have value.
I would just add there are examples. I mean, if you look at Library of Congress and Twitter,
yeah.
Library of Congress is really struggling to figure out how to make all of that data searchable, usable. So then now they're turning to technology in data mining and how to actually analyze and process it. That's sort of trying to bring like archive practice, organizing it together with something like data mining. That's the only way forward, or else it's just a dark archive.
I know, I love dark archive.
Helen, you're absolutely right. That it's going to be this confluence point where, not a big factor word, but big data meets data curation, and there's a collaboration between the various groups that are acting in that area. There's a lot of times, and this addresses their issues like data quality, problems such as annotation of data. These are all big issues in both areas that need to be addressed. And it's also interesting if you take a look at the Liz Lyon, who used to be head of UConn in Bath, and she's now at the University of Pittsburgh. She has created a little hierarchy. Not that it's a hierarchy where the top is the best and the bottom is the worst, but it goes from different kinds of technical expertise. So at the top is the data engineer, who actually is highly skilled in computational languages. And at the bottom is the data narrator, who's highly skilled in natural languages. And in between you have the data librarian, you have the data analyst, the data analyst, the data librarian, the data archivist, and so you have a whole range of different abilities and skills working with data in different ways. And the important thing here is that without the data engineer, you're not going to have folks actually able to curate and analyze the data effectively. But without the data narrator at the other end of the spectrum, you're not going to have someone able to take the data and tell a meaningful story with it. It's the storytelling that's really important, and being able to pull the stories out of the data doesn't happen without a whole spectrum of activities along the way.
Just wanted to pick up on the points as well. I think one of the failures, if you like, of the digital curation and preservation is that after so many years we don't have a body of our own data to do the analysis on. We should have more experimental data, we should have cost data, we should have more of this stuff that we can really start to do the experimentation on. So we can maybe start to look at this and take it forward in our own community and start to build up our own big data set.
Yeah, we should have data sets the way Trek has them for doing experimentation in information retrieval. And you know, and you know, to her credit, she built one here for doing work in genre classification, actually with a number of our students involved in the early stages doing it, and that was a really powerful tool because it was used by a number of students at other universities eventually for their projects because it provided a consistent data set to allow you to test your algorithms against and allow other work researchers who did work to test theirs, and you could see which was better and which wasn't.
Sorry, can I say something? It's just that I thought this would be a good opportunity to ask. I actually think maybe some of these data sets that track uses already, and some of the data sets that people have been collecting in digital forensics and so on, will be useful in doing digital curation experimentation. So rather than trying to build up our own data sets for experimentation, one of the things I would think might be useful is to go to these other data sets that people have already been using for benefit to do some curation experiments.
I think just to clarify, I think it's good to use experimental data sets, but we don't have enough real data on what we're doing and what works, what doesn't, what it costs, who's doing it. So I think we need both. I think we need the real data that we're actually producing, and we're not sharing it. We can't really figure out what's the best approach, what's the cheapest, what's most effective. So I think we need the big data to do the experiments on, but we also need to start to build actual real data that we can trust.
So some of this data is actually real data. It's things like, for instance, in digital forensics, it's things like phones that people acquired on eBay, and they extracted all the information of it. So it's actually information that people created during their lifetime and things of this sort. Just so you know.
Yeah, I'm kind of aware that we're actually 90 minutes into the conversation, and I still have 2 questions. So one of them is slightly throwaway, but this one I think is important because we do have quite a lot of students here who are about to graduate with a Masters in Information Management Preservation. So can I ask you briefly guys, and actually I should never ask anybody to give advice. Giving advice is a really bad idea. Apart from don't start smoking, that's the only advice I would give to anybody. But genuinely, what advice would you give to researchers and professionals just starting out in the field?